Have you ever had a stage in your life where you felt just completely overcome with confusion about who you are, about what you want, like nothing fits it at all anymore, and you have to rethink everything? Like, what if that's not you failing, but simply your brain coming online in a new way? My name is Jessa Francis. I am a trauma-informed yogi, a holistic life coach, and an alcohol-free beverage consultant. And I am sitting here with my bestie, Meg Marshall, who
I am a former therapist, marriage, couple, and family with a focus in trauma and crisis. I worked for 10 plus years as a therapist with at-risk youth and in the eating disordered recovery circles. And now I am a therapy-informed art teacher and a overall delightful wackadoodle. So that's me.
Yay, and I'm so happy to be here today and talking about this. Meg and I are both working, building this beautiful holistic online community called the Kim Circle. I founded the Kim um, a couple years ago because I was lost and lonely and needed support and community. And I also was learning all of this stuff. I was deep diving into yogic philosophy, and I had read all of these self-help books and had done all of this work and got all these certifications around coaching and supporting others and finding more meaning for my life. And I just wanted to share everything that I knew. So we have been working together and putting this out into the world and are just really excited about starting up something a little new. We're going to be creating these little videos where we're going to be talking about different um, big topics that we know are going to really radically help people see themselves in a new way. And so, yeah, today is about the developing brain. Today is about finding compassion for yourself through understanding of our own. The shifts and changes that we're making, the stages that we're pushing through, and the fact that our brain is constantly developing. So the brain doesn't stop developing in childhood. You know, when I was a kid, I was told that, like once you took that IQ test and got your IQ, that was it. Like we thought that our brain developed and then it was done. But that's not true at all. And that there are waves of this rewiring happening throughout our entire lifespan. And there was also, and this is something that we have actually talked about, is we were told that the brain actually, the prefrontal cortex develops around the age of 25 if you don't have trauma. But that's actually not even true. Like it's just continually changing, right? And so Meg has this beautiful way of explaining, which she, you know, uh, being able to explain the way that the brain is developing. And just this understanding in itself really helped me understand is why I was having like these crises. Like everybody says, like you're having this midlife crisis. And I had my first midlife crisis, you could call it, when I was about 25, 26 years old. And so when I found out, oh, my prefrontal cortex is developing, and that's why like all of a sudden I can use this part of my brain where I hadn't been able to before. It helped me better understand why I was struggling with my decisions. So yeah, tell us more about that lizard brain.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I learned this when I was working at Prevail, which is a victims advocacy center here in Noblesville, and I learned this in like 2011, and it has just been so consistently, integral in a lot of my teachings and a lot of my work. But it's incredibly interesting to think about the way that our brains develop and the layers that actually form. And so, like, there's this model called the triune brain model. And it kind of helps break it down super simple. But the very first, like if you imagine that this is your brain and this is your brain stem, The very first layer that develops is our lizard brain. So this is the part where there's the hippocampus, the amygdala. Like these are the parts that really help to monitor your automatic processes. So breathing, heart rate, all of that good stuff. But the problem is that also in this is your panic button. And so this is where you get the fight, flight, or freeze responses, the fawn and the flock as well. And this is kind of like if you have a series of traumas that occur, this can actually become like a smoke alarm that's kind of on the fritz and it goes off at just the slightest little thing. But then like so that this develops in your infancy, pretty much prenatal through infancy is when this starts. And then the next layer is your emotion layer. And that's obviously like love, hate, sadness, all of those, fear and things like that. And that develops next. The final layer that fully develops is your thinking brain. And so that includes that prefrontal cortex that we were talking about and several other, but we won't go into that. But this actually develops and as we continue to learn more about our survival, as we continue emotions, this continues to take that information and develop, more connections and processes and things like that. So whenever there is trauma, and we are struggling with being able to cope with our environment and with what's going on around us, we can receive so much information that we are in danger that we flip our lid, and then your thinking brain literally goes offline. It's kind of like a computer, like completely shutting down, but having still the motherboard still running so that everything doesn't crash, right? But the problem is that when we continue to take information in, and our thinking brain is offline, we no longer can process it. We can't process it properly. And so we basically just kind of take tiny little bits of information. It's like it's been shattered and set aside and put in, a messed up filing system, which is why, one of the things that's really important and why we want you, because those moments in life when things are super foggy or when things are fractured or splintered and you can't remember things and you have brain fog and you're just kind of like, why can't I remember that person's name? I just met them 2 minutes ago. Like, why can't I remember these, the things that I need to be doing? It's because it's possible that your thinking brain was offline and you were actually in a state of fight or flight. So that information isn't actually properly retained. You just have fragments and pieces, which is why triggered when people are triggered, that's why those tiny little fragments of information will pop up and you'll feel some kind of way, but you don't quite know why. It's because that little trigger actually allowed for a tiny little snippet of that information to be brought forward into your conscious brain. And yeah, it gets kind of sticky from there, but but it's a very interesting, like knowing once we understand how functions in this way, then we can actually work with it instead of against it, and instead of fighting against ourselves and saying, oh, I'm just bad with names. Oh, I just can't remember anything. Oh, my memory, terrible. Like those things. All that's doing is just perpetuating that negative self-talk.
Yeah, no, 100%. And so I think it's interesting and something really nice to touch on here is we are in pretty much a constant state of battling against our, our stress, right? And our anxiety. We're just, that's so normal. It has become our baseline to be stressed out. You
Absolutely.
hear that all the time. People are like, "Oh yeah, that's just where I live. That's how I am." And so it's really hard to recognize, because sometimes you have like, say you get into a car accident and like this jolt, and that you're, like in more acute stress versus this simple, like, I'm a just stressed out person, right? Like, I just have this constant to-do list that is never ending, and there's always somebody needing something from me. And, like, and then we get to that normal baseline of stress where even when we do go on vacation, even when we are trying to take care of ourselves and, get a massage or whatever, our brains are still just rapidly going so wildly. that um, we can't even shift
Absolutely.
things, right? And
Absolutely.
so I think it's really important to notice and to touch on that in particular because what do we need to do about it then? Like, how can we shift that then? Because that's the big issue is like we don't want to live that way. We don't
No.
want to be stressed out and we don't want to constantly feel like, well, I just have a bad memory and I just am the way I am and just accepting this identity of
Mhm.
almost like being a failure, right? Of not
Absolutely.
being enough of being
Absolutely.
whatever, like this story that just perpetuates over and over and over because we we have stressful lives. Yeah, our
Absolutely.
our nervous systems are wrecked out, and oh, well, I guess that means my prefrontal cortex is just never going to be online. I'm never going to be in a place of rest and digest. I'm just always going to be sick because of it. Da
Hmm.
da 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 da. So like let's talk about like what it means to have compassion through this understanding, to understand our life stages, and then to find some really practical ways
Hmm.
that are going to help us ease gently into a new baseline because that's the goal, right? We have this stressed out state of being
Hmm.
and we need that to shift. We
Exactly. And I mean, and first and foremost, one of the things that is important to remember is the fact that we can get addicted to cortisol. We can
hmm
get addicted to the stress state. We
Yes.
can, that is as counterintuitive as it sounds, when we are used to being stressed out and then we experience no stress, we actually can be more nervous and anxious because we're waiting for that. Brene Brown calls it foreboding joy. And it's this concept of like, I'm really in a good place. What's going to happen? And it's because we get so programmed and we get so used to being in that stress state that expect it and it's almost comforting. So
Mhm.
like give yourself that grace as well, to recognize those moments. And then, we come to the how do we deal with this? How do we address, you know, how do we address that? How do we address those constant thoughts of and that desire to be in that stress state? And let me tell you, it is not the easiest thing in the world to undo. It's kind of like one of my favorite metaphors. The brain is lazy. The brain develops specific pathways and specific ways of functioning and behavior that work, even if they're neurotic, even if they are technically unhealthy or,
Mhm.
unsafe. There are things that the brain does in order to protect us and in order to basically have life function the way that you are comfortable, regardless of whether that's good or bad, quote unquote. So one of my favorite metaphors is going out to the mailbox after a really big snowstorm and like say it's deep, right? And there's no way you're getting through that snow the first day without a fair amount of trouble. And then the next day you step into those same footprints and it's a little easier. And every day it continues to get easier until you have a path. Well, that's kind of how the brain works. Once you have established that path and it's a habit, um, your brain isn't going to be like, no, now we need to go back through that 6 foot snow and start over. Like that is like, you don't want to do that. And the brain doesn't want to do that either. It's just like, no, we have this perfectly good path. Why would we not use that? And so
Mhm.
when you're trying to change habits, think of it that way because it really does come down to consistency and repetition and patience above all else is a primary thing that you must have, patience with yourself, patience with the world around you as you try to adjust and change. Because otherwise, your brain is just going to be like, oh, you stopped, you settled down. It really well, but we're going to go right back to this path because that's established and we like that one.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, so I think that's one of my primary tips is to recognize how deeply these channels can go and how, deeply seated habits can become.
Right. No, absolutely. And so we have like this balance and this new balance of understanding here. We have this understanding that, our brain is constantly rewiring and that it's happening, and what that means is it's actually a good thing. It's
Mhm.
actually means that it's pliable, that it's moldable, that it's changeable, that we're not stuck. You
Mm-mm.
know, that's one of the biggest things people say, like, I just feel stuck. Well, you're not stuck, right? Your brain is constantly changing and your life is constantly changing, and you do have choice, even if, right, we have these deeply ingrained treks through the snow, right? These deeply
Yeah.
ingrained pathways and ways of being and thinking and doing things. It doesn't mean that you're stuck. It just means that it's going to be harder
Mhm.
to shift, to make a new path, right? And you know, we're learning a lot about psilocybin and its powers to change and rewrite. There's all kinds of different medicines out there, but even without all of that, you don't have to take a mushroom journey to
Mhm.
find to have hope. You know, that's definitely not what I'm saying, but we need to recognize first that from adolescence to midlife to our later years, we are going from, like, if you're a mother, you're going from the maiden to the mother to the crone. There's stages of life
Mhm.
that come with new identity, come with new wiring, with new lessons, and it's going to be, you're going to have like these big breaches of change, right? When you make a big move or a career shift or whatever, there are going to be particularly beautiful opportunities where you can start um, making those new pathways,
Mhm.
right? And I think a lot of forgiveness can come with this awareness. A lot of forgiveness and compassion can come with the recognition that I did my best with what I knew at the time. And we can't beat ourselves up for not knowing what we didn't know,
For sure.
right?
Yeah.
And just allowing ourselves to move through and also find compassion in the fact that this isn't easy,
Mhm.
you know, like I also don't want to say it's hard. You know, like that's a limiting belief in itself. Life is hard,
Mhm.
right? It doesn't you can make it easier just by embracing that knowledge in itself, right? That's
Very true.
how intensely beautiful your brain is. If you think like I have this ingrained belief that life is hard and that everything is going to come with difficulty.
Mhm.
And then what if you didn't truly deeply believe that? What if your belief was that life was super easy, that money was super easy, that, you know, like making friends was, I've just always been able to make friends. I don't get sick. These deep ingrained beliefs are
Mhm.
what are, you know, really affecting and changing the way we behave in the world. So recognize what those beliefs are and then think how can I rewire this? And I know I'm segueing here because we're talking about like the nervous system in itself and the way that the brain is formed,
Mhm.
and how to kind of accept ourselves through all of it,
Mhm.
right?
Well,
So
yeah.
like, yeah, go ahead.
Well, but it is a segue, but it's still it's definitely a part of it because, we have um speaking of myths and things that, we have been told throughout our lifetimes and falsehoods, one of the falsehoods that I think is most profound and interesting and needs to be brought up here is the concept that we are a prisoner of our genes. And we're not, we are not a prisoner of, our DNA. It really does come down to more about the thoughts and the thinking. And it's like whatever environment we create within our bodies, it originates with the mind. And so the brain is incredibly powerful when it comes to creating, your reality. And so it's along those same lines. It's all connected. It's the habit forming, it's the negative self-talk, it's the awareness of your patterning, And it's understanding that it all works together and collaborates in order to create what is essentially your reality. So
Mm,
if we actually address, those negative thoughts and those limiting beliefs, that's incredibly important and powerful and potent, magic in and of itself
mhm,
is being able to recognize, I have told myself that because of my heredity, that I have this, and this, these, and that's not necessarily the case. It's more about the environment that you're creating within yourself
mhm,
through your thinking.
mhm.
So yeah, I wanted to just call that out because yes, it's a segue, but it's a beautiful segue that
Mm.
definitely relates and is important.
Yeah, I read we have 30,000 or 30 trillion cells.
Mhm.
30 trillion cells, and that they're all listening to essentially what you're thinking, because
Yeah.
your brain and your heart and your gut are, they're three different brains. They
Mhm.
all have their own neural pathways. They all have a way of communicating with one another. Everything within you is communicating to itself, right?
Mhm.
Your your pinky and your toe are connected, your brain and your gut, all of these things. And the way that we communicate to ourselves is so important. And how do we learn any of this, right? Well, if you're listening to this, you're obviously interested in learning more about self-development and personal growth and self-awareness. And really, when I first started the Kim Circle, it was called the Empowered Path to Self-Awareness. It's a much longer name, but that's what it still is. It is an empowered path to self-awareness, because that is the key in all of this, is like you being able to get to know yourself, and like understanding deeper and deeper into who, like your big question, like I said at the very beginning of this, have you felt like you didn't know who you were, you didn't know what you want, like have you ever felt that confusion? Well, that's an invitation. That is an invitation to get to know you, to ask yourself, what's working, what's not working, what old, roles and habits don't fit me anymore. Why does all of a sudden am I desiring something new? And that feeling of and that thought of being lost, like I said, I was lost and lonely, and I didn't stay there. I decided differently. I pushed forward with a new way, and like retaining that ability to kind of, and finding the right people, finding the right community, finding the right coach or programmer and whatever it is that
Yeah,
is going to help you.
exactly. Yes, that's highly, extremely important. And it really does. I mean, it just circles right back around to, just having patience and giving yourself grace and truly, realizing, that yes, your obstacles that are in front of you are really from within you. And that it truly does come down to how you interact with your environment, how you interact with others around you, but also primarily how you interact with yourself and how kind you are to yourself.
Mm, yeah, no, 100%, and it really does come down to that self-compassion. And just to reiterate, like the only way to find that self-compassion is through curiosity and asking yourself the questions. I I tell people all the time, like, be that like annoying little 3-year-old that won't stop asking why. Like why? Why do I feel this way? Why do I feel that way? Like what is it getting to?
Mhm.
What deep inside of you is really asking to be seen and heard and loved,
Mhm.
and like being with that and allowing that, thinking about how these habits were formed and all of those things. That's shadow work, right? And that's why I teach it, and why I have found I will forever do shadow work because, one someday soon, today is going to be the past, right? Tomorrow, this day is the past. So
Yep.
I'm going to be constantly having new experiences, and those new experiences are going to affect me.
Exactly.
They're either going to like push me into fight or flight where I'm locked down, or, they're going to help me find more rest and digest. But I think that's what I want to just quickly wrap back around to is the, we were talking about the lizard brain and how, that flap flips open and all of a sudden, our prefrontal cortex, which is our decision maker, kind of goes offline and we are reverting back to a more like caveman style
Yeah.
way of
Yeah,
thinking, right?
absolutely.
And
All
so if
about survival.
Right, and if we want to if we want to keep that decision maker on, if we want to keep that ability and strengthen our ability to have a stronger memory and retain more things and make decisions that are not, based off survival,
Hmm.
then we have to love on our nervous systems. That we
Absolutely.
have to we have to shift our baseline from this stressed out state
Hmm.
to one of the our baseline of rest and digest.
Hmm.
And really quickly, I think I'd also like to touch on, we hear fight and flight, but there's a
Hmm.
lot more than just
True.
fight or flight, right? And
Absolutely.
because we're not being chased by lions and tigers and bears anymore.
Mhm.
Now, what are we doing? Like we're being chased by emails and text messages and phone calls that need to be made and to-do lists and PTA meetings or whatever it is, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So we're not going to fight these people, and
Mm-mm.
we can't run away. So what are we left with, right? We're left with freezing up, just shutting down, which happens a lot. And even if you don't have the opportunity to do that, then what? The number one thing is fawning,
Mhm.
right? Is this people pleasing and this like way or flock, right? You mentioned flock, like
Yeah.
so talk a little bit more about that.
So flocking is where you just basically go along with whatever's going on around you. It's basically, it's don't stand out, don't make noise, don't be seen. It's keep your head down and stay with the status quo. And it basically is just a defense mechanism that keeps you hidden and keeps you small. Uh, Purposefully so that
Mm-hmm.
you're not but this is I think this is a lot of times what people find themselves falling into when they're like, I have no recognition, I have no validation, nobody sees me, nobody appreciates me, like those kinds of things that can kind of come up with when you're finding yourself more in flock than anything else. And then when it comes to fawning, and you are frequently engaging in people pleasing and you're doing everything that you can to make sure everyone else is okay, that is a perfect setup for the trap of codependency, because then all of a sudden you are concerned primarily about the relationships that are around you and you're not caring for yourself, and you find yourself falling into a trap of resentment because you're like, no one ever cares for me, no one ever does for me, I do so much for so many other people, and
Mm-hmm.
it just becomes that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then freezing is it's not like we see it as like, an animal being chased and it's just like this, but it really is more of an emotional, like it's a numbing. It's when you can't
Mm-hmm.
feel your emotions. It's when you don't feel like you can speak up, when you don't feel like you can actually have agency in your own life. So yeah, so those are the other three that are a little less familiar to common public.
Yeah, no, I just think it's really important to touch on those and to dive into a little bit what they look like because I don't think, I know for a long time, I didn't know that those were stress responses. Those were
Hmm.
trauma responses. Those were, that I was showing up into the world because my nervous system was locked down. So
Hmm.
and we commonly think about like, well, I'm not going through a world war or I didn't have a
Right.
natural disaster or something terrible, terrible, terrible didn't happen to me. Why am I constantly people pleasing, right? And
Hmm.
it's actually this trauma response because
Yeah,
just because it's not this big T huge trauma doesn't mean that it hasn't impacted your nervous system. It's simply the
precisely.
way that's impacting your nervous system and therefore flipping the lid. Right?
Precisely.
So all of this is connected. The flipping of the lid, the shutting down of that prefrontal cortex, the lockup in the body, the tightening and throughout the psoas, this uncomfortable feeling that we try to avoid, and in order to avoid it, in order to try however possible to get back online,
Hmm.
we freeze, we fawn, we flock, we do all of this other stuff, right?
Exactly.
And it's just so what is it, right, what is the pathway forward? How do we truly start shifting all of this? First, right, it's recognition, it's awareness, it's okay, now I have a better understanding
Hmm.
of myself, of why I am this way, why I keep repeating these horrible habits, why I keep staying in relationships that don't serve me, etc., etc. Because my very ancient biology is keeping me that way, right?
Exactly.
And so how do we move forward is befriending it. Don't, it's not the enemy. It's
Right.
trying to keep you safe. It's not it's a friend that you want to take its hand and say, I love you. So how
Hmm.
do we love on our nervous system, right? And that's something we could dive deep, deep into, but some very practical ways. And
Hmm.
the first one that I tell everyone is managing your breath.
Hmm.
Simply managing your breath.
Hmm.
Notice when you are having these little short palpitated breaths,
Hmm. Hmm.
elongate your breath. If you have access to your breath, you have access to your nervous system, to your heart rate, to your digestive system, to
Absolutely.
everything. Like your breath is the gateway to everything else in your internal world.
I mean, and that's 1000% true. And one people don't understand is that in our culture now, we are constantly, we're hunching over, we're like curling our shoulders in. And if you're
Hmm.
looking at that from a metaphysical standpoint, we're actually like protecting our heart. We're actually pulling it back in and our shoulders rounding down. It's kind of the same thing that you see if somebody's used to being hit, right? They just kind of curl up like this. But the problem is that when we're doing that, and we also do that when we are constantly, you've seen teenagers like they text and they curl up like this. Um, that is one, but also working on computers.
Hmm.
In our culture, it's very common. But what we're doing, not only are we shielding our heart, but we're also compressing our lung capacity.
Mm,
And when we're compressing our lung capacity and we're using, just a smaller portion of our lungs, we're actually telling our system that we are in danger.
mm,
And so when people are just like, just deep breathe, and you're just kind of like, I've been breathing. Like I know how to frickin' breathe. And it's just kind of like, okay, but why?
yeah.
Because what happens is if you're using your entire lung capacity, you are telling your system there is no bear. Like you are telling your system, I am actually safe. Because if you can breathe all the way down into your diaphragm, you are actually getting that lung full of air and you're able to really process and have all of that beautiful prana like coming into your body. And so that is going to assist you uh, rather
Hmm.
than being in that fight or flight, because that's that fight or flight breathing pattern.
Hmm.
So you have to be careful about that. And real quick, I kind of wanted to scooch back just a tiny bit because you mentioned big T, big trauma.
Hmm.
And one of the things that is important to also realize is that like what trauma is, because a lot of people, like you said, they automatically say, well, I didn't have any really big, terrible things. I didn't have, my childhood was fine. Like everything was
Hmm.
great. do I have stressors? How am I, don't tell me I have trauma. The thing is that trauma is actually, the definition of trauma is any life event that made you feel out of control, helpless, or in mortal danger. And like truly out of control. I'm not talking about just kind of like, but like truly out of control and with imminent threat to your life, to your safety, to your world as you knew it. And so, like, let's think about what that means when it comes to being a child. When you're thinking prenatal to 7 years of age, which was during the time that, most of the wiring is occurring in our brain and we're getting these patterns established, like I often go back to, the drawings that my children used to do where it was like these long, like sticks and then these tiny little bubble heads at the top, right? And it's just like that's what children see. Like think about that. They're so far, so close to the ground and they're looking up at these huge, like creatures standing above them. And so like, if you see the world through a child's eyes, it's easy to see how something that we think is very innocuous can be terrifying and can be something that is actually traumatic. So, like, it doesn't matter if it's, it could be, losing your parent for 5 minutes in the grocery store. That's trauma. It
Mhm.
can be going to your parent at night and saying, I can't sleep, there's something under my bed, and your parent saying, go to bed, don't bother me again. That's trauma because then you have to go back and you have to face that fear by yourself at a very young age. Like,
Mhm.
so little T is like those little traumas that you tell yourself, man, that was stupid. I don't even know why. It doesn't matter. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter because it's
Right.
still valid and it still threatened your sense of self. It threatened safety, it threatened your sense of, being protected and cared for, in whatever way it was. So like, and that doesn't mean that you had a crap, childhood or that your parents did something wrong or whatever, but it does need to be taken into account so that you can understand the stress responses in your body, so you can understand your patterning, so that you can recognize where those messages of I am not safe, I am not loved, I am not seen, like where that comes from. And once you
Mhm.
have that knowledge, then you'll be able to actually take the steps and move forward and work on those.
Yeah. No, 100%. Yeah, no, thank you for diving a little bit deeper into that because I think it is, or I know it is very, very important for people understanding. And all of these are, I don't want to call them basic understandings, but I mean, they're fundamental understandings to
Absolutely.
the next, to knowing where to go next, right? So what we have to have this fundamental knowledge, and then we can move forward with diving deeper into our shadow work, into our svadhyaya, our self-study, and getting to a place where, okay, now that I understand this, now I can work with it, right?
Exactly.
It's like trying to like, oh, I'm just gonna sit down at this computer and immediately know how to write a new program. No, you have to understand what's happening and be able to navigate the computer in itself first. Like, what is this? How does it work? So that I can slowly learn to plug and play. That is you getting to know your system, how you work, and having this information is just absolutely imperative. So.
Absolutely. Mhm.
Yeah. Well, so I think that's it for this little episode that we have here. I just want to reiterate, you're not stuck. You're not alone. Any of these things that you're telling yourself that for why you can't push through this thing, like anytime you think that you have the answer, question that answer. Like just get curious. Try to get curious, try to be compassionate, and use your breath. Like that's the number one tool. Breath and posture.
Yep.
As I stand up a little bit taller, because breath and posture, if you can just work on those two first things, it's really gonna help you. And then learn, like I said, learn more, learn more, learn more. We're in the age of information. Anything you want to know is out there. It is available to you for
Mhm.
free,
Yep.
So So if you were ever not stuck, it is now. And I'll also really quickly, if you are interested in the shadow work, if you are interested in diving deeper into your story, your patterns, your behaviors, and how to rewrite that story, how to rewrite that script, and to start making shifts and changes in your own life, and you want to learn more about that, visit thekimcircle.com. I will put it in the show notes. Find us and a full-blown family community in the Kim Circle membership, where you not only have resources like the community in itself with we have monthly new moon and full moon ceremonies. We have a creative expression class that are incredible by the beautiful Meg. And then we have yoga classes. We have every week we meet for a sacred tea and truth is just an intention setting circle where we can actually look at what's working and, like be truly self-aware. And the Kim has been turned into a framework. C for connection, A for awareness, I for integration, and M for magic, momentum, manifestation, being able to truly move forward and create the life that you want. You have to connect with yourself and source. You have to become aware of your programming and of your patterns. You have to begin to integrate a new story, integrate, right? A new way of being and embody what it is that you actually want to bring forth in life. And then the manifestation is like we're constantly manifesting, right? So how do you want to manifest your life? What is it that you actually truly want to bring forward in your future? And this is just a beautiful program, and we would love to see you in it and to have you as part of our tribe. But thank you so much for everybody that has been here to listen. I'd like to offer everyone, as always, a big, beautiful inhale in. Soften your shoulders, soften your jaw as you sigh it out. You are not alone. You are safe. You are seen and you are loved. There's always space for you. Breathe, my friends. Breathe. Until next week, we will see you soon.